Hey, Canucks fans, welcome to the Line Change. I wanted to go over the interview that Jim Rutherford did with Iain MacIntyre of Sportsnet yesterday, as it's got everybody talking. And no, he didn't, mention he was playing with his brothers, but he did drop another Rutherford bomb. But before we dive into that, I want to quickly give a quick shout out and, excuse me, and thank you to my sponsor, Gassy Jack Art. I got amazing artwork you see over my shoulder there, and you guys can check them out yourselves at GassyJackArt.com. There is a link to his website in the description down below. All right. Let me talk to you. As I mentioned, Jim Rutherford had a Q&A with Sportsnet's Iain MacIntyre, whom is a legend. I love what IMAC does. He's amazing. I hope I get to one day meet IMAC. I just think in this Q&A, the topic of a rebuild was brought up during the Q&A, and Rutherford spoke about it. Of course, when this came out, a lot of Canucks fans were up in arms about this. So we're going to go over some quotes from the article. I'll leave a link to the article in the description down below. You guys can check it out yourselves. We won't read the entire article, but I've got a lot of quotes, and I'm going to pick specific ones, and we're going to talk about it. So, that being said, let's go ahead and take a look at the first one. So, I'm going to bring it up here. So here's the first one. Goes on to say, spoiler alert, Rutherford believes he has the authority to conduct a rebuild, but has no plans for one. And that's whether Quinn Hughes stays or not. This is a quote from Rutherford. So in regards to a rebuild, a rebuild is not something that we're going to look at doing. Rutherford told Sportsnet, like I said, we're in transition. That seems to be his favorite word. But we're not trading all these players for draft picks that may or may not end up playing someday. So they start off with the amount of injuries that the Canucks have had so far, like 19 games into the season. Sportsnet asks, after all the injuries your team endured last season, we thought the law of averages were with you this year, but you've had as many as 9 players out already, and now Demko is injured again, out week to week. Do you feel like you can't catch a break? Rutherford would go on to say, with a compressed schedule, yeah, we expected injuries, but we didn't expect it to this extent. A lot of teams have injuries, maybe not as many as we do, but you deal with it. So he's remaining optimistic when it comes to the injuries. He's not letting it, change his mind, or they're not panicking, which is obviously a good sign. Obviously, a lot of Canucks fans, they don't have that same mindset. They're panicking. I mean, I'm guilty of that myself, panicking from time to time with this team. But it seems like Rutherford has a level head with it. He's not worried. He's not panicking, at least not yet. The Sportsnet would go on to say the injury crisis accelerated when centers Filip Chytil and Teddy Blueger went down the same game in Washington on October 19th. How big of a blow was it to lose Chytil to another concussion just 6 games in? So let's move on to the next one that adds on to this. And this is Jim Rutherford talking about Chytil and, as well as the JT Miller trade that allowed them to acquire Filip Chytil. He goes on to say, well, when we made the trade with the Rangers last season, we were well aware of the risk, that being of Filip Chytil, but he was really the only center available to get back when we were trading such a good center in JT Miller. We were aware of that injury history, and we were hoping for the best. But we openly admitted that we needed to strengthen our center ice position in the offseason, and even to today, Patrick continues trying to do that. So basically, what Rutherford is saying here, they were well aware of the risk with Filip Chytil, like the injury risk, but he was really the only center available to get back when it came to a trade with JT Miller. Plus, you also have to take into consideration that JT had a no-move clause. He decided where he wanted to go, and he wanted to go to New York. And obviously the Rangers weren't going to give up guys like Trocheck or Zibanejad. I mean, I believe they tried to get Zibanejad, but Zibanejad wasn't willing to move and said no and like nixed any type of trade. So, and Filipino was the next man up when it came to a center for the Canucks. And you knew that if they were trading Miller, they were going to want a center in return. This is Sportsnet would go on to ask him, yes, you said after last season that the Canucks needed to acquire a second line center and it would be quote unquote expensive to make that trade, but quote unquote very expensive not to do it. Did you think in April you'd still be waiting for that trade in November? Now, we have mentioned that quote right here on this channel, on this podcast before, and we are definitely in the very expensive category. We're in the very expensive window when it comes to that. Now, Rutherford would respond to this by saying, no, I did not, but it's not from Patrick's lack of trying. So even Rutherford is admitting that he thought by now they would have a second line center. He figured they would get one during the summer, but they ended up not being able to, and we'll get into the reasons why in this next quote that we have. He's calling teams all the time. If it ever gets to a conversation about potentially adding somebody, the price is just too high. So that is the reason that they were not able to acquire a 2C over the summer. The price tag was just too high for Rutherford and Patrick Allvin, and they weren't willing to dip into guys like Mancini, Willander, Coots. They weren't willing to give up those guys, and a lot of teams were saying like, oh, why don't you give us that guy? And the Canucks were like, no, we're not giving up our our high-end prospects for a second line center. So they were basically standing their ground. And of course, Sportsnet would go on to ask, how high? Like Tom Willander and young Elias Pettersson too high? Rutherford would respond with, yeah, like that. One of the things I've been open about is, we're kind of caught in between here right now. I believe our organization has done a good job in building up the pipeline of younger players. Do we want to give those up now, or do we want to keep building? Until we traded JT, we were on the right track to continuing to build towards being a contender on a more regular basis. And then when JT got traded, we were set back. So basically he's saying, they had to pivot when they traded JT Miller. They had to pivot slightly. It set them back. Regardless of what deal we made, you're not going to replace him. That's JT Miller. And so then when we became a team in transition again, there's that word again, and we're still a team in transition. If you look at our lineup now, we've got sometimes 6, 7 first-year players in our lineup, and that's hard. But the positive side of that is that these guys are developing, so there's somewhat of a silver lining in a disappointing first quarter of the season. So he admits you can't replace a guy like JT Miller, a guy who's a heart and soul guy. I know I might be being a little bit biased because of the Miller jersey right there. But yeah, it definitely trading JT Miller set them back. And Rutherford has gone on the record to say that it's not a trade that they wanted to do, that they were forced to make. But moving on to the next quote. Hang on. Here we go. Bring this one up. What do you do to the roster in the short term? So he's talking about like short-term moves for this roster to perhaps make it better. We could make changes, pay heavy prices in trades, and still not be a playoff team. Or we could stay the course, get back healthy, and still have a chance to make the playoffs. But we could also miss the playoffs doing that, right? We're in a very good draft year, and you got to keep that in mind. Right now, as we speak, I would say we would stay the course with developing our young players and getting our injured players back in the lineup and continue to look for that center. We still really don't know what we've got because we haven't had a full lineup. And he's absolutely right there. The Canucks have not had a full lineup. 19 games into the season, at least somebody's been injured. So they've not actually had a full lineup. So hopefully once we get everyone back, perhaps we'll see things change, see things move in a more positive direction for the Canucks. But that is Rutherford's mindset in the short term. They're not willing really to pay heavy prices. Let me see. Which one is it? Oh, so yeah, this is one. So continuing off that, so basically they asked Jim if he's considering trade chips like Willander, DPD, like Armaki, Braden Coots, and Rutherford flat out says that's not in the plan. They're not interested in trading the future. They're not interested in trading guys like Willander, DPD, like Aramaki, or Coots. You know, they want to keep those guys because they know that they're going to help the future of this team. People use different words as to how a team goes forward. Some people use rebuild. Some use the word transition. Hey, there's that word again. You can spin it whatever way you like, retool. But the fact of the matter is we're at a point where our amateur scouts and development staff under Patrick have done a good job in building up a good group of young players. And it would take something extreme for us to start cutting into that. Now, I'm not saying we wouldn't trade one of these players, but if we did, it would be for somebody that's 25 years or younger. Even our core older guys are still in their 20s. We're still a relatively young team. It's not like we're an aging team that's got nowhere to go. Now, this is where we get into the Quinn Hughes stuff. Quinn Hughes' future will be a subplot all season. Will his decision next summer, whether to re-sign with the Canucks or ask out to play with his brothers, determine which direction the team building takes? And Rutherford goes on to say, no, I don't think so. I think as long as we stay the course and keep getting younger players that we feel will play in the NHL and contribute to a team that can become a consistent playoff team and a contender, that's what we would do. Now, is this... don't need to look over that one. This is the one that I wanted to get to because in this one, he talks about Pius Suter and their negotiations during the summer. Everyone knows Pius Suter ended up walking as a free agent, signing with St. Louis and signing for less money than what he wanted in Vancouver. So Sportsnet goes, pardon the pun, but your PK is killing you. Last in the NHL. Is that just personnel? Rutherford would respond with, well, we've had two key guys out, Derek Forbort and Teddy Bluger. So that starts it, but our penalty kill wasn't good at the start of last year either. And it got to a point where we were really good. It has to get better. Whether we change how we kill or we get different people on the PK, it has to change if we're going to win. Perhaps that means bringing in a guy like David Camp, who actually by the time this video probably comes out, may or may not have already either signed with the Canucks or signed with another team. Another guy who was out first on every PK last year, center Pius Suter left in free agency for just a 2-year contract in St. Louis at $4.125 million per. Do you regret not keeping him? Here's the thing with Suter. Rutherford goes on to say, I was going to mention him earlier. He was a guy that we thought we were still in on when he went to St. Louis, and I know he wanted to come back here. There seemed to be some miscommunication on term. Based on what it eventually ended up, we would have considered bringing him back for longer than 2 years, but it didn't work out. I read this quote, and there being miscommunication on term between the Canucks and Suter. That is literally, quite literally, we ran out of time 2.0. I am blown away by this quote and the fact that the reason Pius Suter did not re-sign with Vancouver is because there was miscommunication between the two sides. Like, this is in my eyes, a major screw up by Jim Rutherford and Patrick Allvin. Major screw up. So they let Pius Suter walk, which is something that a lot of Canucks fans feared, and they let him walk due to miscommunication on term. Like, get real. This is bad. Like, this is definitely going to leave a bad taste in Canuck fans' mouths, knowing that this was the reason why we lost Pius Suter, because everyone wanted Suter to come back. And this is I'm floored by this answer from Jimmy Rutherford, and it's a real shame. It's just yet another screw up by this management group. We saw it with Tyler Toffoli several years ago, which is why I brought up the ran out of time quote, which Jim Benning did. And it's just another, basically another Tyler Toffoli screw up. And it's really discouraging to see this type of thing happen again. And yeah, I'm just floored by that. Okay, so here's another quote. So Sportsnet would go on to ask, what's the best case scenario? Rutherford's answer would be, the best case scenario is we get our players back. We stick with the priority we've had for 6 months to get another center and then see where we're at, take a run at making the playoffs. And if you get in the playoffs, you just never know. And Sportsnet would go and ask, and what if that doesn't work? Rutherford would go on to say, then the downside of it is stay the course, stick with what I just said, and we miss the playoffs, so we win the draft lottery and get a top 5 pick and keep building a team that is relatively young, where most of our players are in their 20s. Just keep adding good players. There's a bit of a problem with that, especially him saying, so we win the draft lottery. When have the Vancouver Canucks ever won the draft lottery? Like, the odds of that happening, regardless if they finish, last in their division or, play really bad and don't make the playoffs, it's not a guarantee that you're going to win the lottery. It's called a lottery for a reason. So I don't like that he's saying, so we win the lottery and get a top 5 pick. You're not guaranteed a top 5 pick. Like, you can't guarantee that in November. So I don't really like that quote from Rutherford. I don't like that mindset. But that's just my opinion. Let me know in the comments section down below if you guys share that same opinion that I have. Sportsnet would go on to ask, but not a full rebuild. Rutherford would go on to say, rebuilds can work, but you have to understand rebuilds take a long time. Sometimes they don't. Sometimes they do. Sometimes they do. They don't always take a long time. There has to be a lot of patience, and for the teams that take the biggest jump and ultimately rebuild and win a cup, they usually have a first overall pick. And you still have to get lucky on that. I'm not naming teams, but some have tried a rebuild and had a ton of draft picks that didn't turn out. So a rebuild is not something that we're going to look at doing. Like I said, we're in transition, but we're not trading all these players for draft picks that may or may not end up playing someday, which was the same quote that we took from the first screenshot. And this is the final screenshot from the interview. And this is one that a lot of Canucks fans are going to be looking at, because a lot of people are under the impression that Francesco Aquilini does not want to rebuild. I mean, not under the impression. They know Aquilini doesn't want to rebuild. It didn't happen in the Benning era. They tried to do it, 9 years ago or 11 years ago in 2014 after the 2013 season, and ownership said no. So this is interesting. Sportsnet would go on to ask, if you wanted to do a rebuild, would your owner allow it? To the point where Rutherford responds with, to this point, I've had total freedom to do what I want. Francesco has been very supportive from day one. From the time he met me and hired me, he hasn't interfered. He has left it in my hands. I question that last little bit on the fact that he hasn't interfered. Obviously, there's rumors with Elias Pettersson and the Carolina Hurricanes. Also with, Evander Kane as of late. There's been rumors about Aquilini interfering when it comes to signings, whatnot. So I'm not really buying that last little bit. But yeah, basically what Rutherford is saying is, if he wanted to do a rebuild, Aquilini would let him. I'm finding that a little hard to believe, considering who Aquilini is. But yeah, that was this was the interview with Jimmy Rutherford. Lots of good quotes here. Talking about Pius Suter and just much of a debauchery that whole thing panned out to be. Talked about the JT Miller trade, what he, talks about rebuilding and, the draft lottery. I still am a little surprised that he's even talking about, draft lotteries and getting a top 5 pick when it's not even guaranteed. But a lot of good stuff from Jim Rutherford. Again, he drops another Rutherford bomb on the Vancouver Canucks for the fans to sink their teeth into. But I want to hear from you guys. Let me know in the comment section down below. What do you think about Rutherford's comments? In particular, the rebuilding stuff, the stuff about Pius Suter. Like, does that just grind your gears and frustrate you that they let that happen to Pius Suter when, in an alternate reality, we could have still had Pius Suter and our PK is probably not shit right now. And Pius Suter essentially could have been our 2C for that matter. But let me know in the comment section down below what you guys think. And as always, if you guys like this video, be sure to hit that like button. And if you want, and make sure you smash that subscribe button. Turn on your notifications so you don't miss a single video. And if you can find and interact with us on social media, we're everywhere. Facebook, Instagram, X, TikTok, all the usernames are right there. Feel free to give us a follow on all of our social media platforms. If you prefer an audio version of this podcast, you can find us on both Spotify and Apple Podcasts. On Spotify, feel free to give us a follow, as well as rate and review us. This is, of course, greatly appreciated. And it really helps out the podcast, in particular on both Spotify and Apple Podcasts. But that's going to do it for me. As always, let's go Canucks. And I'll see you guys in the next video.